All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Paula Lemkiel, and I'm with our Belmont Village community in the beautiful La Jolla, California. This is one of our many webinars we usually have on a monthly basis, and we hope you continue to join us. During the presentation, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box. We want to make this as interactive as possible and answer anything that you may have concerns with or wish to comment on. You will have time to hear a little bit more about Belmont Village right after the presentation, so be sure to stay on afterwards if you would like to get more information about us. I have the honor of introducing Patricia Will, who we fondly call here the mother of Belmont Village. Patricia Will is the founder and CEO of Belmont Village Senior Living and a leading innovator in her field. As we celebrate 25 years, Belmont Village currently operates 33 best-in-class communities in 8 states and Mexico City. The company was among the first in the nation to fully vaccinate its resident population, as well as our workforce. Patricia has been inducted into the Texas Business Hall of Fame and into the Senior Housing Hall of Fame, and was recently awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award in the McKnight's Women of Distinction program, which she is currently in Chicago right now to receive that award tonight. Thank you so much and welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here today with a great friend and collaborator, Dr. Jeste. How many times have each of us said, I wish I knew then what I know now? As an older person myself, I'm grateful for the presence of mind that comes from wisdom. Yet we also all know people who seem to be older, but not wiser, and young people who are terribly wise. Thanks to groundbreaking work by our speaker today, Dr. Jeste, we will learn that wisdom is a personality trait. It can be enhanced at any age, and that this trait can actually be found in the neurobiology of the brain. It's a privilege to say that we at Belmont Village have been collaborating with Dr. Jeste, head of the Stein Center for Research on Healthy Aging at University of California, San Diego, for now nearly a decade. The Stein Center will have a physical presence in our soon-to-be-launched community in La Jolla, where Dr. Jeste's team will help our residents engage in resilience and wisdom training. Dr. Jeste is a distinguished professor of psychiatry and neurosciences at UCSD, where he founded the geriatric psychiatry program in 1986. Today, it's one of the largest and most successful programs of its kind in the world. Dr. Jeste's work has been cited by multiple news outlets and in publications far and wide, from Time magazine to the Wall Street Journal. But what I find unique in working with Dr. Jeste is his humility and that inherent curiosity that drives him to places heretofore not explored in the neurobiology of the brain, like resilience, and of course, our subject today, wisdom. So Dr. Jeste, pleasure to be here with you, and take it away. I gotta get off mute.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for such a kind introduction. I feel privileged and honored to have worked with Patricia and Belmont for a number of years. Belmont is hands down one of the finest senior housing communities anywhere in the world. So thank you, Paula, also. And I will talk about one of the studies that we did at Belmont. And we look forward to further work. One thing that I really appreciate in Patricia as a leader is her focus on 2 things. One is providing the best care to the residents, and 2, making sure that what is practiced at Belmont is evidence-based. There are very few people who do both of these things so well. So thank you, Patricia and Paula and others from Belmont for making us your partners. And we really look forward to many more years of work together. Thank you. So let me share my screen. So you can all see the slides, right? And let me start with this one. Okay. So as Patricia said, I'm going to talk on resilience and wisdom in senior housing communities. So these are the people who actually do the work. My job is to give a talk. So these are my faculty colleagues, trainees and staff. And to my right is Daniel Glorioso, who is executive director of our center. I'm going to begin with aging and resilience. Next, I will talk about wisdom and aging. Then I will talk about both of them as being opposite of loneliness. So loneliness versus resilience and wisdom. And finally, talk about interventions that are based on enhancing resilience as well as wisdom. You know, in general, when people talk about aging, they think about aging as gloom and doom. Everything goes down with aging. There is degeneration, decline, diseases, disability. That's not true. That's actually only a part of aging. There are two phases of aging. There is clearly a sad phase. There is no question that the physical health declines. We lose friends and family and so on and so forth. But there's also a happy phase. And this is something we have been interested at UC San Diego for a number of years. About a dozen years ago, we started a study called SAGE, Successful Aging Evaluation. We wanted to find out what is successful aging. And aging doesn't begin at age 65, it begins at birth. But here our focus was on adults across a lifespan. So we have been studying 1,500 plus San Diegans from age 21 to 100 plus. Now we have been following them for more than 10 years. And we were interested in looking at both physical health and mental well-being. So the horizontal x-axis, you see the age increasing, and the vertical y-axis, you see the percent of people who are doing well. So when it comes to physical health, we all know that 20s and 30s, they are called the fountain of youth. That's when people have the best physical health. And physical health declines with age. We develop arthritis, diabetes, hypertension, and what have you as we get older. So by the time we are in their 90s, most people have some disease and disability. What about mental well-being? It goes exactly in the opposite direction. And that is the paradox of aging. You know, the fountain of youth, 20s and 30s, there is also a fountain of anxiety, depression, and stress. And if you think back about our 20s, I think we will all agree that that was a really tough period, just coming out of adolescence and then having to make major decisions, a lot of peer pressure, and constant feeling that we are not doing as well as we should. The good news is that things start getting better. It is not that things start getting better, it is that we start doing better with what we have. So mental well-being actually is better in the 70s and 80s than it is in 20s and 30s. Why is that so? Part of that is because of increased resilience, part of that is because of increased wisdom. So what is resilience? So resilience is the ability to cope with stress, to overcome adversity. Resilience is a trait and a process. So it's a personality trait, just like optimism, neuroticism, introversion, extroversion, just a characteristic pattern of behavior. But it's also a process in which we recover from adversity and overcome stress. A number of studies have been done on resilience, and they show that even in people who have physical illnesses, resilience is associated with what are called medically desirable behaviors. Things that we should all be doing, healthy behaviors. That is better self-care, making sure we are adherent to the treatments that we are prescribed. We have physical activity, we sleep well, and we have less pain and better health. Resilience is associated with greater longevity. Numerous studies have shown that. Another important thing that is related to resilience is social engagement. Social connections are so important. There is a meta-analysis of 148 studies of social engagement across the world, including more than 300,000 people across age groups, different racial, ethnic groups, men, women, different diseases. It found 50% increased likelihood of survival among socially engaged people compared to non-socially engaged people. That effect is greater than the effect of treating hypertension, obesity, as well as smoking, drinking, etc. It's a huge effect size, and it is something that we have some control over. Social connections are very special. And again, for people living in senior housing communities, that's one of the major pluses, that you have social connections there all the time. And this is a beautiful quote by Julianne Holt-Lunstad, professor of epidemiology at Brigham Young University. She said that humans need others to survive. Social connection is crucial to human development, health, and survival. The evidence supporting this contention is unequivocal. There are perhaps no other factors that can have such a large impact on both length and quality of life from the cradle to the grave. How true this is. And this becomes important as we get older. The home is increasingly becoming the home for healthcare. Until recent decades, we went to hospitals and clinics for healthcare. That is not the case anymore. And increasingly, the care will be more and more at home, especially given the technology such as telemedicine and iPhones and so on. And this becomes especially important for senior housing, senior living. Its role has changed. It is not just a shelter or a financial investment. It is becoming the home for healthcare, home for technology, lifestyle, community engagement, and especially for seniors who have retired. So we have the benefits of all of these in a good senior housing community. So now I want to talk about wisdom. The concept of wisdom has been around from the beginning of humanity. Sophia is the Greek goddess of wisdom. And actually, there are more goddesses of wisdom than gods of wisdom in different religions. But empirical research on wisdom is a more recent phenomenon. Started only in the 1970s. And now, in the last decade, though, it has been growing. In the last decade, there are 2,000 papers, peer-reviewed papers, that had wisdom in their title, or that was one of the keywords. So that is a good news, that the research on wisdom has been growing, but it's mostly done by gerontologists, sociologists, and psychologists, not enough by physicians, healthcare professionals, or neuroscientists. And that was one of our goals, to study wisdom from that perspective also. So what is wisdom? As Patricia mentioned, it is a personality trait. But this is a trait with specific components. The most important component is pro-social behaviors, empathy and compassion. Empathy means sharing or understanding somebody's emotion. Compassion means acting on it and helping others. Second one is emotional regulation. Think about a teenager, right? His emotions fluctuate hour to hour, minute to minute. And think about a wiser, older person who has control over the emotions, calm, unruffled, self-reflection, ability to look inwards, trying to find out whether we can improve and how we can improve. Then comes something that is sadly lacking these days, which is accepting uncertainty and accepting diversity of perspectives. I may have strong values about something, but I can understand why somebody else may have different values. We can still talk. We can still try to understand each other's perspectives. We don't have to agree with others. And at the same time, we have to be decisive. We cannot be sitting on the fence all the time. But decisiveness does not mean making instantaneous decisions. It means making a rational decision, which sometimes take time. And lastly, social advising. Keeping your wisdom to yourself is not good. You need to share it with others and help others. So this is the wisdom as a personality trait. The next question is, how do you measure it? There are scales for measuring different personality traits. For example, there are scales for measuring resilience, optimism. We developed a scale for measuring wisdom with my colleague, Michael Thomas, psychologist and an expert in skill development. So we developed the San Diego Wisdom Scale, and you can actually click online to ucsd.aging.edu, and you'll find it. So the larger scale has 28 items, the shorter scale has 7 items. So there are a bunch of statements such as these ones. It is important that I understand the reasons for my action. So this means self-reflection. Another item is, I have trouble thinking clearly when I'm upset. So that is opposite of emotional regulation, that when I get emotional, I can't think logically. So there are items like this, and you have to say to what extent you agree or disagree, and then you get a score. This scale has already been translated into several languages. So what does wisdom have to do with aging? Number of studies all over the world have shown that older people tend to have more emotional regulation, more emotional positivity, that is, they favor positive emotions and positive memories. They have more empathy and compassion. They have more self-reflection, and they make better decisions that require experience, because experience comes with aging. And those of us who are above a certain age, if we think backward, I think we will agree that aging, indeed, we get better control over our emotions. We become more self-reflective and so on. And increase in wisdom with aging. As Patricia said, it doesn't occur in everybody. There are some unwise old people and some very wise young people, but by and large, wisdom does increase with aging. And this actually may have evolutionary significance for human species. There is something called grandmother hypothesis of wisdom. Okay, so what you see here in this figure, at the top, that couple, they are grandparents. In the middle is an adult daughter. So if the grandparents, especially the grandma, helps her adult daughter raise children, the adult daughter lives longer, is happier, and produces more children than her mom did. So the grandma cannot produce children anymore because she's past the age of menopause, and the grandfather is also past the age of andropause. So they cannot contribute to species survival by producing children, but they contribute to species survival by helping the younger generations be healthier, happier, living longer, and more fertile. It is not just fertility and health, it also means transmission of social cooperation and cultural values to grandchildren. You need grandparents to transfer and transmit those values to the younger generation. And numerous studies again have shown that grandparenting has significant positive impact on children, grandchildren, that is. This is a large study of 1,500 secondary school students in UK. They found that when grandparents were involved, those children, when they grew up, they had fewer emotional problems, more pro-social behaviors, and fewer adjustment difficulties compared to kids in whose upbringing grandparents were not involved. And this was especially true among teenagers from single parent and step-parent families. Intergenerational activities benefit both the generations. There's a major study called Experience Score, and you can Google and you'll get more information about this. This is a study funded by MacArthur Foundation about 20 years ago, and Johns Hopkins and several other universities participated in it. What they did was they took older adults who had retired, and they divided them into 2 groups. And one group was as to spend at least 15 hours a week in a public elementary school. And that to try to help those kids with reading, writing, arithmetic, but also life in general, how to overcome stresses. After 1 year, they found that these kids, of course, were very happy. Their grades went through the roof and everything worked out very well for those kids. But importantly, older people also did much better compared to those who were not involved in helping these kids. The older people who did, their mental health improved, physical health improved, biomarkers of stress and aging in their blood and urine improved, and the volume of the hippocampus on the brain MRI was larger in these older people who participated in the study at the end of the study period compared to those who did not. Now, that doesn't mean the hippocampus grew in size. What it means is it did not shrink as happens with aging, normal aging in other people. And Patricia mentioned about the neurobiology of the brain present. So without going into technical details, we have found that there are specific areas of the brain that are clearly involved in wisdom. Prefrontal cortex, especially ventromedial, dorsolateral, anterior cingulate, and insula, and what is called limbic striatum, which includes amygdala and ventral striatum. Again, I will be happy to talk about technical details if people have questions. But the question is, how does wisdom increase with aging, right? When I went to medical school, I was taught that the only thing that happens to brain with aging is that it shrinks. It loses synapses, neurons, and that is true. However, that's only partial truth. In people who are active, so here the important term is active. People who are active physically, cognitively, socially, in those people, there's greater recruitment and more efficient utilization of neuronal networks in old age. There is formation of new synapses and even new neurons in selected subcortical brain regions. The caveat is, of course, this cannot continue forever. There comes a time when people start developing dementia or some other thing, then of course that's a little strong. But that may not occur until 70, 80, or even 90. So I talked about both resilience and wisdom and how they're relevant to improved functioning in aging. But there is another personality trait that goes in the opposite direction, and that is called loneliness. And loneliness is related to social isolation, but the two are not identical. Loneliness is subjective, something that we feel distressed because we are alone. Whereas social isolation is objective. You can measure the number of social relationships and you can say somebody is isolated or not. So you can be lonely in a crowd. You see that in college students. They live in a dorm surrounded by hundreds of students, and yet they feel very lonely. On the other hand, you may be living by yourself, but only with your spouse, and not feel isolated, not feel lonely, because you have the quality relationship. And loneliness has been increasing during the recent decades. And why is loneliness a problem? Because it increases the risk for heart disease, diabetes, obesity, major depression with suicide, opioid use, alcohol use, anxiety disorders, Alzheimer's disease, and other dementias. Lot of literature, many studies done all over the world have shown that people who are chronically lonely and more severely lonely, they're at a much higher risk of developing these diseases over a period of time. And of course, many of these diseases are potentially fatal, and that's why the mortality is higher with loneliness. Just to give you one example, so major depression, which is associated with increased risk of suicides. These are the data from the CDC, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the US. They reported that the rates of suicide in the US increased by 33% from 1999 through 2017. This is before COVID, nothing to do with COVID. So loneliness has been increasing and suicides have increased. Same thing is true for opioid use related death. Those deaths have increased tenfold in the same period. And the result of this is that the average lifespan in the US fell for the first time since the 1950s in 2016, 17, 18. Again, this was before COVID. So COVID is not responsible for that. I mean, obviously, COVID will bring down the lifespan further. But this was happening before COVID, and that is because of a pandemic of loneliness and social isolation. At the same time, that is true for general population. What about older people? So I talked about how older people, may be wiser, tend to be wiser than younger ones. Older people often tend to be more resilient because they have more experience and they learn from it. So when the COVID-19 started in, remember, March, at least in the US, it hit mainly in March 2019. And in the beginning, all the news was about deaths in nursing homes. And then deaths in other places which took care of older people. So it was clear that older people were at a high risk of physical complications, death, ICU, etc. And also older people didn't have technology, most of them, unlike younger people. So when the social distancing came into play, older people felt even more lonely. So the expectation was older people would do much worse in terms of depression, anxiety, suicides, and so on. What we and others found was the exact opposite. Older people had lower prevalence of psychopathology and higher prevalence of resilience and wisdom than younger ones. And look at this study, published in JAMA Network Open. They looked at 5,000 American adults. They found that the prevalence of depression, anxiety, and severe stress was 15% in adults over 65 versus 75% in adults between 18 and 24. Wow, five-fold difference. One would have expected that it would go in the opposite direction, but no, it didn't. So now you'll remember also the slides that I showed you about the paradox of aging, how well-being actually improves with aging in spite of increasing physical illnesses and social isolation. The good news about loneliness is that loneliness and wisdom go in opposite directions. So, and I'll talk about that shortly in the next part, that number of our studies have shown that people who score higher on wisdom, and that's true for resilience also, score on higher on resilience, they're less likely to be lonely and vice versa. And this is not just a clinical finding, it also has biology behind it. We published a study of microbiome. UCSD has a great microbiome center led by Rob Knight. And diversity of the microbiome is thought to be good, is known to be good for the health. If you have diverse microbiome, that's good for health. We found that diversity was much higher in people who had high levels of compassion, wisdom, and social engagement, as well as resilience, but diversity was low in people with loneliness. So this is actually a biological association also. So what I'm telling you is that resilience is good, wisdom is good. So the question is, how can we increase them, right? Again, many older people are wise and they have resilience. Nonetheless, again, as Patricia mentioned, all of us can be more resilient and wiser, right? And especially I think younger people need that probably even more. And there are evidence-based interventions to increase resilience. There have been papers published on things like stress management and resilience training, or SMART. There's a master resilience training for the armed forces, and mindfulness-based stress reduction. And some of these things have been shown to have biological effects. You know, this is like putting your head or brain on a treadmill. The more you do it, the stronger the muscle will grow. One study found that 2-month mindfulness-based stress reduction reduced inflammation in the blood. Another found that daily meditation increased the life of the cell and white matter integrity on brain imaging. And this is a study I want to spend a couple of minutes on, because this was a study that won Mather Institute's Silver Award for innovation. This is the study done in 5 senior housing communities, and Belmont really was the leader in that. Paula was heading the Belmont Center in San Diego, and of course, Patricia was the leader for the whole community. So this study, it was a randomized controlled trial, which included an intervention to improve resilience. It is called Raise Your Resilience. So the first month was controlled. People didn't get anything. The next month is when they received the intervention, which was a group therapy. Group therapy done by a staff member in that facility, not done by researchers. And we, of course, trained those staff members, but they were great. And then after that intervention ended, we followed them for 3 months to see if the improvement lasted. This is the manualized intervention. And by the way, we have the manual available. And if you're interested, we'll be happy to share it with you. And it involved 3 sessions, group sessions, each for 90 minutes. Each session included savoring engagement in value-based activities, keeping a gratitude diary, write something that made you feel grateful at the end of the day, do that regularly, and homework assignments. Homework assignments included things like breathing exercises. Again, doing something that makes you feel happy, doing something that is helpful to others. So you feel grateful to others and you make others happy by helping them. The outcome was there's significant improvement in well-being, significant improvement in resilience, and significant improvement in wisdom, and reduction of loneliness in the intervention group compared to the control group. And this is a paper we published in a peer-reviewed journal, International Psychogeriatrics. And as I said, this got the Mather Foundation's Silver Award for innovation. And I really feel proud of this. Proud of this because it actually could be implemented. And it couldn't be implemented by researchers. You really need partnership with senior housing communities like Belmont. And actually, Danielle and I, we visited Belmont after the intervention was completed, they came out, and we talked to the people who had participated in the study. And they were all delighted to hear that. And their question was, so what is next? What next? How can we participate in more research? And that's what, again, makes Belmont so special. So as Patricia mentioned, published a book called Wiser, how to sort of the science behind wisdom and how can we become wiser. So are there interventions that can increase wisdom? Actually, the answer is yes. We published a meta-analysis of 57 randomized controlled trials to enhance empathy, compassion, altruism, or emotional regulation, or spirituality. And these were studies done in people with mental illnesses, physical illnesses, those from the general population. Nearly half of the studies reported significant improvement in that component of wisdom with moderate to large effect size. So what can we do for ourselves and others? So, we all know the importance of physical exercise, right? We set aside time for physical exercise, treadmill, walk, whatever. We should also set aside time for wisdom exercises. There is something called 3 good things. At the end of the day, think about 3 things that were meaningful to you because that made you feel happy, that made you feel grateful, whatever. Volunteering outside your regular job. Meeting with people who are different in age, different in color of the skin, different in education level, and so on. Self-reflection, thinking about how you handled things during the past 2 weeks and what can you learn from that. Self-kindness. When we talk about compassion, we talk about compassion toward others. We also have to be compassionate toward ourselves. And I find that many older people who are professionals are really who are very particular about helping other people, they often tend to be, they feel guilty and they are very demanding of themselves. And that's not good. I mean, be kind to yourself also. And lastly, serenity prayer. Give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So I've been talking about individual wisdom, but really the society is formed of individuals, and the societal wisdom is also important. And as I showed you earlier, the last 2 decades have not been great. Again, as you saw, the average lifespan dropped. And people have become more stressed, polarized, angry, anxious, depressed. Gallup, I will show you the next slide. And that reflects this modern behavioral pandemic of loneliness, suicide, and opioid-related deaths of despair. So this is a Gallup poll. It's worldwide, but they found that in the US from 2008 to 2018, there was a 25 to 40% increase in stress, worry, and anger. And I bet the survey done today will show it going up even higher because of COVID and all the related stress. So there is something happening to the society. I think our well-being has significantly gone down, and we need to do something. And that something is the last bullet point here, that we focus too much on hard skills, reading, writing, arithmetic. In medical school, how to be the best diagnostician, best therapist. We really need to teach soft skills. We need to teach soft skills of wisdom and resilience, compassion, self-reflection, accepting diverse perspectives, keeping social connections. We really need to do that at all levels, students, businesses, and even politicians, if possible. And this is beginning to happen. The World Health Organization has something called Global Network of Age-Friendly Cities and Communities. San Diego, by the way, is one of the age-friendly communities that the local board passed a resolution several years ago. Of course, it is easier said than done, but at least the goal is to make the whole city more friendly for older people, structurally as well as functionally, giving them more opportunities for education, learning, and leadership. Also, there is a movement called Compassionate Communities movement. It started in New Zealand, now in Europe, and hopefully it will come to the US. And this is my last slide, that, working together, we all can potentially transform today's lonely, distressed, and polarized world to a happier, healthier, and wiser society. Thank you all for your attention. And thank you for the opportunity to talk with you. And I'm open to have any questions, comments. So thank you again.
Dr. Jeste, thank you for that tremendous presentation. I think for those of us who are getting older, we often forget something that you said that was so terrifically important, which is that, yes, our bodies may decline, but our mental health and sense of well-being improves, and that we can even do more to train ourselves, just as we have the trainer at the gym. In your book, Wiser, you identify the parts of the brain that control wisdom. For those of us who are not scientists and who've never mapped the brain, how do you know that?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. How do we know that is by, of course, looking at the literature. There have been number of studies. They don't necessarily include the word wisdom, but you look at wisdom, as I said, is a composite trait that includes emotional regulation, empathy, compassion, and so on. So there have been studies of people that had higher versus lower emotional regulation or compassion. And actually, there are diseases that are associated with absence of those traits. For example, there's antisocial personality, right? Sociopathy, psychopathy, that's a diagnosis that people receive. So these are the people who have no empathy and compassion. And there have been brain imaging studies of people who have a diagnosis of psychopathy or sociopathy and comparing them with healthy people. Similarly, there is something called frontotemporal dementia. Okay, it's a type of dementia, and not as common as Alzheimer's, but it is the third most common dementia after Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia. It occurs a little earlier in the 50s rather than beyond 60s. And the main symptom is not memory loss. The main symptom is change in personality. And it is exact antithesis of wisdom. When people develop frontotemporal dementia, they become less compassionate, less empathic, they become less emotionally regulated, no self-reflection, so on and so forth. And there have been many brain imaging studies of those people. So comparing those people with people who are healthy, you can see what are the component, what parts of the brain are affected in those. So that's, and there are functional imaging studies in which you put your head under the magnet, you show a picture and see how a person reacts to that. And different people react differently, and you can follow the course of what happens to the brain during that period. So this is really based on that kind of neuroscience.
You mentioned in the 5 things you can do to enhance wisdom. I love what you captured there. The use of practicing gratitude and a gratitude journal, and also the serenity prayer. Can you describe what it means to practice gratitude and why that has a tendency to foster wisdom? Sure.
So empathy and compassion are part of the wisdom, of course. And so, so the gratitude diary, the purpose is that you write 3 things before you go to bed that made you feel grateful. Okay. And this has now changed actually the recommendation to 3 good things. So where not only you feel grateful, but you feel happy, you feel proud of yourself because you helped somebody else. If you do that every day, then you begin to get up in the morning and think about, what am I going to write today? And so we start thinking about that right from the beginning of the day. So that becomes second nature. So that's the point. Everything mentioned, just like physical exercise, if we just do it once a week, that's not going to help. We have to do it every day. So similarly, these practices, they need to be done regularly for them to be effective.
So does that mean I should change the timing of my gratitude journal from the night to the following morning? Or the morning to the night? Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. It truly doesn't matter. Also, some people have found that for people, it is hard to keep a gratitude diary, in the sense to write something every day. That becomes almost stressful. And so that's why it has shifted now to 3 good things. You don't have to write them necessarily. You can share those things with your spouse or best friend or something, or you can make just a note of that, or you just say to yourself. So the point is not so much writing as thinking about those things. And whatever time of the day you can do will be fine.
Dr. Jeste, you've talked quite a bit about social isolation and social isolation as kind of an enemy of well-being and wisdom both. And even people who are in crowds can feel socially isolated. Have we been able, since the pandemic caused so much social isolation, have we been able to measure in any way well-being of people, for example, in community as opposed to home alone? Are there any studies on that yet?
There have been studies of anxiety, depression, stress, etc. During the COVID pandemic. And again, the findings vary according to the place where the study was done. And one of the surprises was that actually older people did better than expected, younger people did worse than expected. And that really shows, and really older people were at a strong disadvantage. One, they had a clearly higher risk of developing COVID and the complications and hospitalization, etc. Also, they really didn't use FaceTime or social media, so they didn't have the friends online or on social media that the younger people had. Yeah, I think what made the difference was the quality of relationship. It is that, and again, but that is where I think senior housing communities were helpful. That here you have a choice, you have other people. And even though you may not, while you can keep a 6 feet distance, you can still talk to them. They are there. Whereas for people living by themselves, that was really hard. You have to go outside, and then how can you go outside? Because they didn't use FaceTime, at least in the beginning. I mean, it took a long time before older people got used to technology. And not all of them are still comfortable with that. So again, having this opportunity to socialize with others is clearly important. But of course, just having an opportunity doesn't guarantee that you will not be isolated, because loneliness is subjective. So it's really the quality of relationship that matters. But you need to have opportunity. So it needs both opportunity to socialize and you are wanting to do that, and the quality relationship.
I want to come back to something that you talked about earlier that had to do with grandparenting. I am going to have my 3 grandchildren this weekend, ages 6, 4, and 2. And I know that I will be exhausted by the time the weekend's over, but I hadn't thought about the fact that the plasticity of my brain will have improved. Talk a little bit about this intergenerational cry that we hear, not only for the good of the children, as you talked about, but really what it means for those of us who are seniors.
I think intergenerational activity is really very, very important. This is something, and actually I blame the society for not allowing it to be more. I mean, I gave an example of that experience score study where retired older people agreed to spend 15 hours a week. Efforts like that should be compensated. People should be paid for that time, because in a way they're serving as caregivers. And if we hire a caregiver from outside, we have to pay that person. And so we have a huge resource for the society in older people who have retired and who are still healthy, who want to do work. And healthy doesn't mean physically healthy. Somebody in a wheelchair can still help younger people. We see that in some of the nursing homes, for example, which are, I mean, obviously not somebody who is severely demented, but people who have even mild cognitive impairment, they can still help others. They feel good about themselves. And so we at UCSD, we started something called design competition. What we did was we took some engineering students and took them to some senior communities, including senior centers. And they formed a team. So say 2 students and 5 seniors, okay? And then they worked together for a year. I mean, not all the time. I mean, just even 1 hour a week, something like that. And their goal was to develop new technology to help some unmet need of older people. For example, an older person gets up in the middle of the night, goes to the bathroom, he's likely to fall down because of the darkness. So some of the students, they develop something called lighted carpet. Only that part of the carpet on which you put your foot, that lights up, and so on. Just one example. I think things like that are necessary. We should develop this kind of partnership because it helps both. So the older people actually were very happy to work with these very smart kids, but those younger people were very impressed with how wise the older people were, how much they learned from them. So again, it's a mutually beneficial activity.
I think we have time for one more question that came in from the outside. For cities who has identified as age-friendly, have they been able yet, or has anyone been able to measure whether seniors are happier, say with the SAGE index or any other indices?
Yeah, sure. I think there are some cities, I think this has happened more in Europe than in US because it started first in Europe. But yes, there have been studies. They have shown that both the functioning and well-being of older people has increased, where the communities were able to actually make sure that the age-friendly the community became age-friendly. And of course, during COVID, the last 3 years have been not very easy to do that because of the social distancing that was necessary. But now that the COVID is almost behind us, hopefully forever, I think we need to revive that. And AARP is actually the leader for that in the US. And so I think what I would suggest is, if you live in a city that is age-friendly, formally work with your local AARP organization and see what can be done.
Thank you for that. One final question, and it really relates to not so much COVID, but the experience that we've all had, which is different in different parts of the world. It used to be when I would travel to the Orient that I would be surprised at the number of people that were wearing masks all the time on airplanes and in streets. Something that in America has been quite an adjustment for us and that we can't wait to undo. It strikes me that it's harder to get to know someone, to feel connected when you can't see them smile, when you're just looking at eyeballs. Has anyone looked at this to try to understand whether it detracts from happiness, from wisdom, from any of those things?
That's a great point. I mean, that's really a good topic for research. I think the only confounding factor is sometimes there are the reasons for not wearing masks or wearing masks sometimes may confound the
Sure.
that. But nonetheless, that is, I think that's a very good point. I mean, it's really fantastic idea for research. So thank you. My case is in future. I mean, I hope we don't have to use masks again, but if they are needed, something like that happen, I'm sure that industry will come up with something like masks that are very transparent, where actually you can see the face in spite of there being a mask, so long as it also protects you. But nonetheless, it's a great question, Patricia.
Dr. Jeste, listening to you always is like drinking from a fire hose. I learn a lot and I'm grateful for the tips you've given us on how to improve wisdom. I also very much look forward to the studies that we're getting ready to launch at Belmont Village. I'm going to turn it now with my profound thanks to you, to Susan Berger, who is a long-term expert in facilitating solutions for families for Belmont Village. Susan, all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Jeste, and thank you, Patricia. As Dr. Jeste discussed, when we speak about seniors, we must really understand how they embrace their age and changes in their life, and how they face the many challenges that come with aging. Most seniors enjoy their independence and control over their lives. So it's only natural to think of a senior living community as a loss of that control, which is a chief fear of seniors. But such loss can include loss of independence, loss of personal health, family and friends, not to mention loss of their home. But what we really need to realize is that what our seniors really need is not tangible at all. It is a deeper sense of purpose and belonging. At Belmont Village, we strive to support our residents' sense of purpose and enhance their quality of life. We know that every one of our residents has a story to tell, and we seek to understand the things that are most important to them. We want to learn about their past, their professional lives, their personal challenges, as well as their hopes for the future. For 25 years, Belmont Village has owned and operated best-in-class, fully licensed senior living communities, and were founded on the belief that every senior deserves to live self-directed lives in a supportive community, but one that's filled with new friendships and interests, safety and security, quality and value, and above all, a place that they can call home. It's all about quality of life at Belmont. It's about health, energy, and purpose. And we want all of our residents to stay healthy and active, and in so doing, to live well. Our goal every day for every resident is to support that healthy lifestyle. We know that what you eat and drink, how much you exercise, and the way you socialize are all equally important to successful aging. And we believe in a person-centered approach in providing our services. And our services receive help every day with activities of daily living as needed. And although their needs may vary, they can count on our caring and compassionate staff who are committed to providing high quality, person-centered care. Residents can also count on our Belmont Village nurses. Those are trained medical professionals who are dedicated to serve the healthcare needs of each resident. And while they're keen observers and they can access residents' changes in health quickly, they're there 24 hours a day to provide peace of mind, not only for the resident, but for their families. And we also know that successful aging involves staying active. So whether they want to kickstart their day with group fitness or one-on-one exercise, our goal is always to help stimulate both their minds and body at whatever level they feel successful. Several years ago, Belmont Village developed the Circle of Friends, the first of its kind, comprehensive and therapeutic program designed to support the needs and abilities of our residents with mild cognitive impairment or early to moderate stage memory loss. And as a result of the lack of socialization and stimulation caused by this pandemic, I receive so many calls every day concerned about their loved ones' cognitive decline. The Circle of Friends is a structured 7-day-a-week curriculum of mental and physical activities that are focused on building cognitive reserve in order to maintain brain function. And while our residents continue to live in their same apartments, they also enjoy all the social and physical activities that are provided to promote a whole brain fitness lifestyle. And at Belmont for Everyone, we believe in the Just Right Challenge. It encourages our residents every day to stay involved, maintain brain function, build confidence, and have a new sense of purpose. I'm proud to say that Belmont Village across this country and Mexico, we always strive to create a positive experience for all of our members. Those members include our residents, their families, and our caring and compassionate staff. We always continue to set new standards in both family and resident satisfaction, and we are recognized as a great place to work by our over 4,000 employees nationwide. Understanding our seniors and helping them to choose the right senior living community is one of the most important life decisions. Please take the time to compare and don't wait for a crisis to react. If you have any questions about Belmont Village or our highly regarded Circle of Friends, I do hope that you will give me a call, send me a text or an email. I'm here for you 24 hours a day. My phone number is 424-232-0701, and my email is sberger@belmontvillage.com. Thank you, Dr. Jeste. Thank you, Patricia. And thank you all for joining us today. I look forward to seeing you at our next event.